in this edition of Insight. It's Veterans Day in South Dakota and Military Appreciation Month. We visit the South Dakota National Guard Museum and visit with Secretary Larry Zimmerman. That's tonight on Insight. Hey, thanks for watching. November is Military Appreciation Month. It's the first time in U.S. history we've set aside an entire month to thank our veterans and their families. What better place to observe this than in Pierre's South Dakota National Guard Museum? We caught up with Director Sonja Johnson to visit with her about the National Guard Museum, and we'll visit later in the program with Veterans Affairs Secretary, you know him as Command Sergeant Major, Larry Zimmerman. Tell me a little bit about what is the museum and a little bit about its history and its mission.
All right. Well, the South Dakota National Guard Museum is basically a building, which is our largest artifact, where we house and tell the story of the South Dakota National Guard. Basically, our history goes back to 1862, back during the Dakota territorial days is when we got our start, and we're telling the story clear up to our current conflict and the deployment of our current soldiers, both our Army Guard soldiers and our Air Guard soldiers, both. We tell their stories.
You mentioned the building itself as an artifact. I had to look that up. I'm not going to name names. Steve Harding, our mayor here in Pierre, remembers drilling as a young National Guard soldier in this building. This was OMS number 7. It was in operation from 1941. It was a vehicle and weapons storage building built by the Public Works Administration. So this was National Guard Armory up until about 1974-75.
Well, it was part of the armory. They actually did the drilling in the old auditorium that they just tore down over there. This building itself, we held the vehicles. What you'll see is around the doors, you'll see it's kind of inset. That's where the big bay doors were at, where they would bring the vehicles in. On this upper level, we had 4 different bay doors, and then downstairs we had like 5 different bay doors. The maintenance shop was downstairs, so they would take the vehicles in downstairs and work on them. They would store them up here. We had our mess section, also our medical section. They had their storage area here. So yeah, this was just a big maintenance shop is all it was. So yeah, it's one of our oldest artifacts. It dates back to 1942 time frame. And like you said, it was by the Public Works Service is who built the building for us.
So National Guard soldiers, active duty, military, they would remember if they were in from the mid-40s to the mid-70s, chances are this building would have played a role in part of their mission or their assignment.
That's correct. We still have guys come in here sometimes and they're like, I remember being in here and it looks different. And so yeah, it's a great building. It's a great artifact.
Well, it does look different. We walked in this morning, and this is beautiful. I mean, it's really taking on the museum. You can see your influence here. At one time, it was more of a storage facility for a lot of important artifacts, but now you were saying that you've completely remodeled this main gallery. Tell me a little bit about this wide open space here. What's this about?
All right. Well, this main north gallery we did a couple years ago. We took it clear down to the studs on it. We've put in brand new ceiling tiles. This upper part here, we raised the ceiling by 3 feet. This lower part here, we raised the ceiling by 18 inches. We have all brand new lighting. We insulated the walls and painted. We have brand new carpeting and everything in it. This large section here that you were asking about, this is our rotating display. It's very hard to constantly change out our displays. It's very time consuming, but we do make an effort. We have 3 different displays that go up here throughout the year. We try to get the units to actually participate, and like a year ago we had the firefighters, both the Air Guard firefighters from Rapid City and the guys from the Air Base out in Sioux Falls. They both donated firefighter gear, and so we had a nice display of firefighters with the National Guard, both on the Army and the Air Guard side of the house, so people could kind of see what the different, what they did, what their specialties were for the different branches. And so it was a lot of fun. We've done a display of the history of the 147th Army Band. We just took down a commemorative, it was the crosses from our soldiers from the 147th Field Artillery that were killed during World War I. This year is the 147th 100th anniversary, so we did kind of a special display for them. So that's what we do there.
So if a person has been to the National Guard Museum, even just within the last several years, they should really make time to come back and visit again, because displays are changing. There are new artifacts being brought out and new relics and new rotating displays coming through all the time.
That's correct. We're constantly trying to keep it fresh for those repeat visitors. We're actually in the process right now of switching out a lot of our displays. We're also going to be changing the format and the layout of the way our displays. So between now and January, things are going to be in transition quite a bit. My goal is to have it all completed by the first of the year. So definitely, even if you've been in the last 3 months, come back in January, because it's all going to be changed around again. So
fantastic. Well, let's take a look at some of these displays.
yeah.
Sonja, tell me a little bit about this, and what are we trying to educate people about this display?
All right, what this display here is this is a map of what the Dakota Territory looked like shortly after the Louisiana Purchase, once all the territories were broke up. A lot of people don't realize that the Dakota Territory actually consisted of 5 states. So we've got North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and just a little sliver of Idaho was actually involved in the Dakota Territory as well. And 1 month after the Dakota Territory actually came into existence, that's when the Civil War broke out. And so what happened is all of the active duty soldiers in the Dakota Territory went off to go fight in the Civil War. Well, there was also an Indian uprising happening at that same time. So what we did is we petitioned the War Department to be able to form 2 companies of soldiers to help defend our settlers against the Indian uprising. It was approved, and we got the 1st Dakota Cav Company A in 1862. Now, that group of soldiers is part of our forefathers for the South Dakota National Guard. So our National Guard actually precedes our statehood. And what happened is as time went on and states were actually formed and fell out of the territory, it wound up being just North and South Dakota. Well, of course, when we became states, we split that 1st Dakota Cav. Company A stayed with South Dakota and Company B went with North Dakota. So we kind of, our National Guards share the same founding forefathers. So that's kind of a unique aspect of our history and how we got started.
So we want to get this correct. If you're an A quality soldier, you went to South Dakota. If you were B, you went to North Dakota.
You could look at it that way.
I think some folks do.
I think I would look at it that way. I'm very proud of our South Dakota soldiers' history and what they've done. We have been involved in every major conflict except for the Vietnam War, and that's because the president did not activate the National Guard units. So,
okay, let's take a look at a few others. First major deployment for what we know today as the South Dakota National Guard. Spanish-American War. A lot of soldiers were deployed for the very first time away from home, away from the farm. Tell me how important the Spanish-American War was to the South Dakota National Guard.
Well, actually, the South Dakota National Guard was not involved in the Spanish-American War. We were activated for it, but back then we traveled by boat and we missed the war. And so it was already over by the time we got there. But we were there for the Spanish insurrection. And that's kind of where the governments were, trying to get stabilized, and there was different fractions fighting, trying to decide who is going to take over power and things like that. So we were involved in that. And then, like you said, it was the first major deployment of the South Dakota National Guard. So it was a big eye-opener as far as we're as good as everybody else in the United States. We're not some small state, small group of soldiers. I mean, we really had an impact.
This is where a lot of the units received their first missions, where they were more than just an infantryman. This is really the first time that we start operating as an actual militia, as part of an Army unit, a much, much larger federal unit.
And I think that that's true with all National Guard units. People didn't take us seriously up until this point. And at this point, we proved ourselves. We can actually be part of the real Army, and we can have a mission, and we can, perform a role just like every other regular soldier does.
As we said, this was the first time a lot of Dakota militiamen were away from home. They had lived their entire lives in small communities and on the farm, so the first time, as you mentioned, traveling on boat to a foreign country, this had to be a great adventure, and they really looked at it as a big adventure.
Oh, definitely. But I think soldiers today a lot of times look at some deployments as a great adventure, especially some of our younger soldiers. It's the first time they've got out of the state of South Dakota. So some things just don't change, exactly. So, but yeah, it's a lot of people grew up during that time frame.
Anytime we bring out archival photographs, you've got my attention. This is really impressive. Tell me a little bit about what's in this display case.
This is actually talking about the deployment to the Mexican border during 1816. Pancho Villa was coming across the border and raiding Texas settlements, and we're like, we're not going to have that. And so they sent a lot of National Guard units, and of course our South Dakota Guard units went down there to kind of defend the border from the raids that were going on. Our soldiers spent 7 months on the border. We didn't see any action, but it allowed our soldiers to have a lot of really, really good training. And that training was most beneficial because when they came home from the Mexican border, some of those soldiers were only home just a week or so, and they were again reactivated because World War I was kicking up. They were afraid of sabotage on the railroads and the bridges, and so we activated soldiers to go stand guard on that. Within a month, all of our Guard soldiers were activated to go fight in World War I. So the training that they did on the Mexican border was very beneficial. They were kind of ahead of the game on their training by the time they deployed for World War I. But we complain about our soldiers and their deployments. Here they spent, 7 months on the border. They come home, they're home for a month, and then they take off and they're gone for 3 years for World War I. So kind of rough on the families, I'm sure.
And at that time, the Spanish-American insurrection and the Mexican battles, that was like days and days away. It wasn't as easy as getting around as we think of today. So heading off to Texas and Mexico, that was a month just in travel at that time. So they really were a long way from home.
That's correct. A lot of times we'll think, oh, we'll just, take the interstate and head down to Texas. It takes us a couple of days to get down there, 2 days or something. And back then it wasn't. It was a lot of work. And it was, like you said, with the Spanish-American War, sometimes it's the first time some of these guys have been off the farm. So it was not only hard on them, but it was hard on the families having them gone. A lot of the women back then, they had to step up and they had to run the farms then. So
this is in preparation then for what we know today as World War I. And this display case tells the story better than anything else that I've seen in a long time. Tell me a little bit about World War I and the history of the South Dakota National Guard.
Yeah, World War I was very unique because we sent the 4th Infantry to World War I, and before they even left the United States, they were switched over to the 147th Field Artillery. Never having touched a piece of field artillery equipment in their life. They didn't know what they were getting into. The guys did a great job, though. Phenomenal service. They learned how to use their equipment. One battery actually was retained as instructors because they did such a good job. They got a number of commendations in it. This case here is specifically from Thomas Devine. He was one of the members of the 147th Field Artillery, and these are some of the items that he brought back. This is one of the uniforms that he wore during that time frame as well. So it's really nice when we get pieces that actually have a story and a connection to one of our soldiers. And we do have quite a few pieces like that, but we do have other pieces where it's like, this is what they would have used, it's kind of a representation. But this entire case here actually belonged to one of our soldiers, and so it's got a really neat story with it.
So tell me a little bit more about how you acquire pieces for the collection. They come in from families like the Devine family, and they donate or make this available on a long-term basis. Do you receive a lot of donations and memorabilia from families?
It's kind of hit or miss. I mean, it seems like sometimes I'll have, 1 week I'll have like 3 or 4 families come by and ask about donations, and then other times it'll be months between people stopping by and things like that. Because of our limited storage, we have gotten very selective about what we can receive in. That's one of the drawbacks to the museum here is we're running out of space. We actually would like to start making some more money and building a new building eventually. But for right now, we're trying to collect those most important pieces that tell those stories. So especially if it has a connection to a South Dakota Guard soldier, we're very interested in those pieces and that story.
So if you have a family member and you're going through maybe a trunk that grandma or grandpa has, an uncle, and it appears to be vintage South Dakota National Guard collective pieces, contact the South Dakota National Guard. Don't throw it away just yet. You guys may have an interest.
Definitely, we would have an interest. And if you do not live in the Pierre area, just send us some pictures. You can contact me either via my email, or we do have a Facebook page, so you can always message me on Facebook. That's probably the best way to get hold of me. Just send me pictures of your pieces, and I can kind of look at them, and we can go from there on it.
I see some more photos over here. Can we move on?
Definitely.
Well, immediately after World War I, let's just jump right into World War II and tell me about what we see in this display case.
All right. Like I had said before, some of our artifacts are directly tied to people. A lot of the artifacts in this case here are representation artifacts that we have. We kind of had a huge footprint during World War II because we had soldiers both in the Pacific Theater and in the European Theater. The 147th Field Artillery actually left the United States before World War II started. And they were 3 days out from Pearl Harbor when Pearl Harbor got bombed. So sitting in the middle of the ocean, headed to the Philippines, they decided maybe they needed to paint their boat gray, and they changed some machine guns to the railing and got really nervous on if there was any Japanese ships sitting out there. So they did not make it to the Philippines. They actually were diverted and landed in Australia. The 147th was the first Allied troops to set foot in Australia during World War II. We were actually there during the bombing of Darwin. If you go to Australia today, Darwin actually has a museum and a memorial to our 147th Field Artillery soldiers because of just what we did during our time there. After World War I started, we mobilized and deployed our 109th Combat Engineers, and they actually started out their deployment in North Africa. And they were over there, and then they went over and helped to liberate Rome and spent time over in that lower part of the European continent over there before finally coming home. So yeah, both of our units performed just spectacularly during their deployments in both theaters.
Well, we're up to Korea now, and I know that South Dakota National Guard, in fact, my next door neighbor, Don Rounds, was deployed with the Guard during the Korean War conflict. So tell me a little bit about this.
All right. Well, the Korean War, a lot of people think, oh, you went to Korea and fought. Well, the 196th Regimental Combat Team actually wound up going to Alaska during the Korean War. A lot of people don't realize that during World War I, the Japanese actually took and held 2 U.S. islands. And during the Korean War, they were afraid that that same thing was going to happen. And that's why they decided to mobilize troops to Alaska during that time, is that way we could be kind of a defensive force if anything decided to happen up there. They also did a lot of experimental training at that time frame on, you know, how do you move soldiers around in that kind of environment? What's the effect of the cold climate on your equipment, things like that. So that's what they did during their time frame up there is, you know, trained. They were border guards technically up there, but they had a lot of fun up there. Kind of an interesting story. Now, we don't know if this is factual or not, but the story is we were actually slotted to go to Korea, but South Dakota is a very patriotic state. We had so much of our male population enlisted in the Guard that they said if they sent the 196th Regimental Combat Team to Korea, that if anything happened, it would decimate the male population of the state of South Dakota. So we were flip-flopped with Colorado. Colorado went to Korea, and we took their mission to Alaska. So, and that is all in part of Colonel Skur. He's the driving force behind that change. You can get kind of some of Colonel Skur's story here. He's also in the South Dakota Hall of Fame for his work both with the state and with the National Guard.
And these Korean soldiers from the South Dakota National Guard, they endured a lot in the Aleutian Islands. It was a miserable, frozen assignment, and battle wasn't the issue. It was the elements. Just surviving that assignment was really an accomplishment. That's
correct. It was very intense. They would go out and they would live in little pup tents, out in the middle of the boonies in Alaska. And so those elements was one of the things they had to learn to overcome. Some of these guys had never seen skis before, and so they had to learn how to ski. You start talking to these guys, and they've got some great stories about their time up there. So, but yeah, like you said, a lot of it was just getting through the cold.
So we changed galleries. We're in Gallery B of the South Dakota National Guard Museum. First of all, the thing that jumps out at you right away is this Napoleonic era cannon. This is a near perfect example of an actual South Dakota artillery piece. Tell me about this.
All right, this artillery piece actually belonged to the unit that was in Canton back during the Spanish-American War. They loved being artillery, so when the Spanish-American War rolled around and they wanted those guys to switch over to infantry, they didn't want to, and so they didn't deploy. They got left behind. But this is one of their pieces. It was used for a number of years in reenactments and in the parades and things like that. It's been refurbished a couple times, and now it's wound up here at the museum. So, yeah, it is. It's a really unique piece. So.
And like you said, it's perfectly original. It was in operation. It was used by the National Guard. That's really what you're looking for, pieces that are true to the South Dakota National Guard. You've got a room full of them. What else do we see in this Gallery B?
All right, we have a number of different things. We have an aircraft, an OH-6 aircraft, and actually our South Dakota recruiters used to like to fly around in these to the different schools and things like that.
I bet they did.
They had a lot of fun with that. They, at one point, could actually go land on the football field and do recruiting events and things like that. People used to dismiss the entire school when these guys would fly in with the OH-6s and do events at the schools and stuff. So, yeah, those guys really had a lot of fun playing with the helicopters. So we've got that. We've got some replicas here. It is an original piece, but was not original to South Dakota National Guard. But we have the Jeep, and we also have the truck here. We get a lot of mechanics come in, and they want to peek under the hood all the time. Both of these pieces can run. We don't like to take them out. It's a huge undertaking, but if something special does come up, both of these pieces can run. So we have run them in the Parade of Lights before. So.
In both these vehicles, I mean, these are the backbone. These are the workhorse of what a South Dakota National Guard soldier, regardless of his unit or mission assignment, they probably remember these, whether you're in World War II, Korea, as late as Vietnam. These are going to be some of the vehicles that they would have vivid memories of.
Oh, yeah. It was a standard piece of equipment that these guys used, so it doesn't matter, what kind of unit you were with. You had a Jeep and you had a truck. You had to get your soldiers around. You had to get your equipment around. So, yeah, most people recognize these.
Now, I also see over here that we've got jet aircraft engines. We've got the a model of the multi-ribbon bridge system. You've got something from just about every type of unit in South Dakota, don't you?
We do. We are trying to cover all of our soldiers and everything that they have done, which is a huge undertaking because we have so many different jobs that our soldiers have done. I mean, we have firefighters, we have doctors, we have cooks, we have builders, both of bridges, roads, buildings. We've got our artillery units, we've got our trucking units. We have soldiers with a number of different abilities. So. Yeah, we try to give everybody something that they can come in and be like, oh, I remember that. Here's a story. So that's what we like.
And the National Guard isn't just Army. It's not just Air. The museum represents both the Army and Air Guard.
That's correct. We want to represent both our South Dakota Air Guard and our South Dakota Army Guard. They are both very vital to the state of South Dakota.
So I'm told one of the most talked about displays here at the museum is right behind us. Can we take a look?
Definitely.
Okay, so this is the most viewed display here at the South Dakota National Guard Museum. No wonder, it's firearms. Tell me a little bit about what you have on display here.
Oh, we have a ton of different stuff on display. Everything, our muskets way back from 1862, clear up to we've got M16 here and a number of different pieces in between there. We have a variety of Air Guard pieces, complete with people love these little survival rifles. We have an M6 and an M4, and people are like, pilots had rifles. Yeah, it just collapses down. And so they think that's really unique, the story on, how the pilots use the rifles and things like that. And then we have a nice display of Iraqi weapons as well. Most of those were brought back during Desert Storm, Desert Shield.
It really is an impressive display. Like you said, from 1860, those first muskets, these are originals. This is not like something that we're taking as souvenirs. This is an impressive collection. I would imagine a lot of people will really do enjoy seeing what great-grandpa might have carried in 1860 Civil War era, all the way up through what a brother or sister, or maybe they carried in the Iraq campaigns. Tell me a little bit about that, because your history isn't just the militia. You're talking about Iraq war veterans, Afghanistan, all the way up to present day.
That's correct. We want to cover the entire history, even the current history of what our soldiers are doing. And that's part of the remodel that we're going to be doing right now. Our current gallery only goes up to Desert Storm, Desert Shield. But when we finish in January, we'd like to be up into our current conflicts and what our soldiers are doing overseas today and the different places our soldiers are going, because we're not just in Iraq. I mean, our Air Guard unit has already been over to Korea. So we have a lot of different places we're still going, a lot of different missions we're still working on. And I think people need to know that. And they need to know the extent that our South Dakota Guard is being used.
So we've been all over the inside of the National Guard Museum, but really a lot of the story is outside. You've got some impressive displays outside this building as well. An A-7 jet, one of the only ones on display to the public, Sherman tank, 75 millimeter cannon, 105 millimeter howitzer, anti-aircraft guns, an armored personnel carrier, and a lot more. Just walking around outside the museum, every kid likes to take a look at that Sherman tank, I'm guessing.
Oh, they do. The Sherman tank is wonderful. And the Sherman tank was actually one of the tanks that our 196th Regimental Combat Team used up in Alaska. So it is a piece that our South Dakota Guard actually used. A lot of times people ask where I'm at, and I'm like, kind of give them directions, and I'm like, just know that we're the only place in town that has an airplane in our front yard. Yes. So, and that A-7 Delta actually was part of the Air Guard and was painted white and flew all over the United States during the Air Guard Centennial and represented and recruited for our South Dakota Air Guard. So that aircraft itself does belong to the South Dakota Air Guard and has a history and a story in itself. So.
And a brigadier general in the cockpit, I'm told.
Oh, yes. And I wasn't here personally, but there's enough people in the community that remember when it was flown into the Pierre Airport, the engine was taken out, and they trucked it down here. They had to close off roadways and everything. So, yeah, there's still a lot of stories about them bringing that aircraft down here.
It's a lot of fun, and of course, whether the Guard Museum is open or not, you can always enjoy the outside displays. Well, they always say you exit through the gift shop, and it wouldn't be a complete tour if we didn't stop and mention that there are a lot of really cool things here for people, that souvenirs, gifts. I know holiday shopping is coming up, and everyone's always wondering what they can get mom and dad, grandma or grandpa, or maybe a little one running around. You've got some unique gift ideas here. They should really check out the gift shop at the South Dakota National Guard Museum.
That's correct. We have a lot of fun with our little Army toys. We've got tons of, the little Army soldiers, but then even for the smaller type ones, we've got some of the little stuffed animals. We've actually even got a stuffed tank in here. So we've got everything from models to stuffed animals to, the little bracelets and keychains and things like that. We've also got some clothing items to offer. So we try to have a large variety of items from you to choose from. Pretty much everything is on the low end when it comes to cost. So they're great stocking stuffer ideas.
And of course, those proceeds help continue the mission of the National Guard Museum.
Correct. We do not charge an admission fee. It's free to come to the museum and wander around. So it does definitely help the museum out when you purchase something at the gift shop.
Okay, so when are you open? Because I know right now there's a grandma or a grandpa out there. They've got grandkids coming in over the holiday season. They're wondering, what are we going to do? You can't sit inside all day. The weather may not be cooperating, but you have free admission. This is a great place for kids. Maybe somebody's looking for something to do with their family over Thanksgiving or Christmas. So what are your hours?
All right, we are open Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. We're open in the evenings and on the weekends by special appointment. Just give me a call or send me a message on Facebook, and we'll see what we can do to accommodate you.
We mentioned before that things are always changing down here. If you've been to the National Guard Museum before, make time, come back, see it again because it's changing. But how can I stay up to date on what's going on here with the museum on a regular basis?
All right. Well, we do have a Facebook page that gives us our regular up-to-date, like if we have to close for weather or something like that, or if we have a special event going on. We always post events on our Facebook page. In fact, we have an event going on this coming Thursday in the evening, and so we'll have information on our Facebook page about that as well. We try to periodically post today in history, some of the unique things our South Dakota Army and Air Guard soldiers have been doing.
One of the most special things that you get to do, I know from visiting with you in the past, is you get to visit with a lot of veterans. And this is Veterans Month, the first time the United States have set aside a whole month to talk about veterans and for veterans. And one of the things they want to do is encourage veterans to tell stories. I'll bet you hear a lot of stories as people walk through and look at the exhibits.
The best part of my job is when you get these older veterans that come in and they come pull up a chair in my office and spend an hour just telling me stories. I have to say that's probably my favorite part of my job.
Well, thank you for all that you do and for keeping the heritage alive here. I know it's a lot of work, and it's just an incredible place to visit and just beautifully done. So thank you again, and happy Veterans Day.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'd like to thank Sonja Johnson for making the tour available to us. And of course, if you haven't been there in a while, it's well worth the time to check out the South Dakota National Guard Museum. Like we said, kids love it, and you will always learn something. New exhibits are coming soon, and of course, there's always something new in the collection as well. So thanks again, and make sure you stop by the South Dakota National Guard Museum. While we were there, we also bumped into Secretary Larry Zimmerman. Now, Larry, as you know, is a former Command Sergeant Major in the South Dakota National Guard and currently our Veterans Affairs Secretary.